Captain Jae-ho Kim had seen many strange things during his 15 years in the United Nations Space Command, but nothing like this. The massive silver ship hanging above Seoul sparkled in the morning sun. It was 3 times the size of the largest aircraft carrier ever built, and it made no sound at all. "Sir, they're sending another message," said Lieutenant Han, her fingers moving quickly across her tablet. "Same as before. They want to meet with Earth's leaders." Jae-ho nodded slowly. After 3 days of the alien ship simply floating there, the world's governments had finally agreed on something. They needed someone to lead the first contact team. As the commander of humanity's only working spaceship, the UES Pioneer, Jae-ho had been the natural choice. "Tell them we accept," he said. "Send them the coordinates for the meeting point." The chosen location was a large field outside the city. Less chance of panic if things went wrong, the politicians had said. Jae-ho thought it was a smart choice, even though he didn't believe these aliens meant any harm. If they wanted to attack, they could have done it already. 2 hours later, Jae-ho stood in the field with his small team. Dr. Min-ji Lee, Earth's leading expert in languages, stood to his left. On his right was Security Chief Yu Bin, her hand never far from her weapon. Behind them, a mix of scientists, military personnel, and government officials waited nervously. A beam of soft blue light appeared from the ship. It touched the ground 30 meters away from them, and 3 figures stepped out. Jae-ho heard gasps from behind him. The aliens looked almost human, except for their silvery skin and slightly larger eyes. The one in the middle stepped forward. "I am Commander He-jin of the Galactic Council's Diplomatic Corps," it said in perfect English. "We come in peace." Min-ji's eyes went wide. "You speak our language." He-jin smiled. It was a very human expression. "We have been observing Earth for some time. Learning your languages was necessary for this moment." "How long is some time?" Jae-ho asked. "Approximately 50 of your Earth years," He-jin replied. "We needed to be certain your species was ready." Yu Bin's hand tightened on her weapon. "Ready for what?" "To join the galactic community," He-jin said. "Your species has achieved faster than light travel, even if only in small steps. That makes you eligible for contact under Council law." Jae-ho thought about the Pioneer, humanity's first FTL-capable ship. It could barely reach Mars in a single jump, but it had been enough to prove the concept worked. "The Council?" he asked. "The Galactic Council represents 32 spacefaring civilizations," He-jin explained. "We maintain peace, regulate trade, and ensure the stable development of younger species like yours." Over the next few hours, He-jin explained more about the Council and its member species. They came from all corners of the galaxy, each with their own unique biology and culture. Some were as old as 1,000,000 years, while others had joined only centuries ago. What interested Jae-ho most was how He-jin described the Council's military. They had massive fleets, advanced weapons, and strict protocols for everything. But something about the way He-jin talked about it seemed odd. A week later, Jae-ho found out why. The Council had invited a small human delegation to visit their nearest base, and he was chosen to lead it. The Pioneer made the journey in 12 jumps, each one guided by the alien ship. The base was a massive space station, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Ships of various sizes and designs moved around it in perfect formation. Everything seemed to follow exact patterns. "Your ships move very precisely," Jae-ho said to He-jin as they watched from an observation deck. "Of course," He-jin replied. "Efficiency requires order. Each movement is calculated to maximize performance while minimizing risk." Dr. Min-ji, who had come along as part of the delegation, spoke up. "But what happens if something unexpected occurs?" He-jin looked confused. "Unexpected? Our systems account for all variables. There is no need for unexpected events." Jae-ho and Min-ji shared a look. They had both noticed this pattern in their conversations with the aliens. They seemed to have trouble with the concept of uncertainty or chaos. Later that day, they got to see this trait in action. During a routine docking procedure, a small mechanical failure caused one of the station's guide beams to flicker. It was a tiny problem that any human pilot would have easily adjusted for, but the alien ships near the affected area froze completely, waiting for new instructions rather than adapting to the situation. "This is fascinating," Minji whispered to Jiho as they watched the aliens scramble to restore proper order. "They're incredibly advanced, but they seem to lack basic adaptability." Jiho nodded. He had seen something similar during their tour of the station's military training facilities. The alien combat simulations were impressive but rigid. Each scenario had a correct solution that never changed. That evening, in their assigned quarters, the human delegation had a private meeting. "They're like perfect machines," Yu Bin said, pacing the room. "Everything has to be just so. No room for creativity or improvisation." "It's not just that," Minji added. "Did you notice how they react when we ask questions they don't expect? They almost seem uncomfortable with new ideas." Jiho thought about the military simulations he had seen. "I think I understand why they've been watching us for so long before making contact. We must seem completely chaotic to them." "But isn't that a strength?" Yu Bin asked. "Being able to adapt and think on our feet." "Maybe that's why they reached out now," Minji suggested. "They've seen something in us they don't have." The next day, Jiho decided to test this theory. During the demonstration of Council military tactics, he asked if he could run a simulation using human strategies. Hejin agreed, though somewhat reluctantly. Jiho chose a simple scenario, defending a space station from attack. But instead of following the Council's standard formation, he split his forces into irregular groups. He had some ships hide behind asteroids, others make random course changes to confuse the enemy. The alien observers watched in what seemed like horror as Jiho's chaotic strategy unfolded. But when the simulation ended, he had achieved the objective with fewer losses than their standard approach. "This is unprecedented," Heijin said, studying the results. "Your method appears highly inefficient, and yet, sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one," Jiho replied. "Humans have learned that chaos can be a tool if you know how to use it." Heijin was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps this is why the Council was so interested in your species. You think differently than any civilization we have encountered." Over the next few days, more tests were run. Each time, the human delegation demonstrated approaches that the Council had never considered. They showed how improvisation could solve problems faster than careful planning, how controlled chaos could be more effective than rigid order. The aliens were both fascinated and disturbed. Some, like Hejin, began to see the potential in human thinking. Others were clearly uncomfortable with such unpredictable methods. On their last day at the station, Hejin came to see them off. "The Council has made a decision," they announced. "Earth will be offered full membership with some unusual conditions." "What conditions?" Jiho asked. "We want to learn from you," Hejin said. "Your chaos, your creativity. These are traits our civilization has lost over millennia of seeking perfect order. The Council believes you can help us remember how to adapt." As the Pioneer prepared for its return journey, Jiho stood at a viewport, watching the massive station grow smaller. Humanity had not only made first contact, but had also discovered something unexpected. Their greatest weakness in the eyes of their own people, their chaos and unpredictability, might be their greatest strength among the stars. Minji joined him at the viewport. "What are you thinking, Captain?" "I'm thinking about chaos," he replied. "All this time, we've been trying to eliminate it from our systems, our societies. But maybe we've been looking at it wrong. Maybe chaos isn't our enemy. It's a tool," Yu Bin added, coming to stand with them. "Like any other tool, it's not good or bad on its own. It depends on how you use it." Jiho nodded. As the Pioneer made its first jump toward home, He couldn't help but smile. Humanity was about to bring some chaos to the perfect order of the galaxy, and somehow, he knew things would never be the same. The stars streaked past the viewport, and Jiho thought about all the changes that would come. The Council would learn about humanity's way of thinking, and humanity would learn about the Council's technology and knowledge. It wouldn't always be easy. Chaos never was. But that was exactly what made it valuable. As Earth's first faster-than-light ship carried its crew home with news that would change their world forever, Jiho realized something important. The galaxy wasn't ready for humanity's chaos, but maybe that was exactly what it needed. 6 months after first contact, Lieutenant Du-Young Park stood at the command center of the Galactic Council's largest military base, watching the holographic display with growing concern. The red dots representing enemy ships moved in a perfect, predictable pattern. That was the problem. "They're testing our defenses again," said Neri, the council member who had been assigned to work with the human observers. Her silvery skin reflected the red glow from the hologram. "Yes," Du-Young replied, "but why are they being so obvious about it?" The enemy ships belong to the Shadowkin, an aggressive species from the outer rim of the galaxy. For the past 3 months, they had been probing Council space, following the same attack patterns that they had used for centuries. Du-Young had spent weeks studying the Council's military history. The Shadowkin would attack, the Council would defend using their standard formations, and eventually, the Shadowkin would retreat. It was like a dance where both partners knew all the steps. But something felt different this time. "Commander," Du-Young called out to the alien officer in charge, "have you noticed that their formations are slightly tighter than usual?" The commander looked at the display. "Our analysis shows they are within normal parameters." "Normal parameters," Du-Young muttered. That phrase was starting to give him a headache. He turned to Neri. "Can I show you something?" Neri followed him to a smaller display terminal. Du-Young pulled up the records of the last 6 Shadowkin encounters. "Look here," he said, pointing to the data. "Each time, their ships are moving just a little bit closer together. It's such a small change that your computers see it as normal. But they're changing their strategy, piece by piece." Neri's large eyes widened. "But the Shadowkin never change their tactics. They have used the same approach for over 300 years. Maybe they've learned something new," Du-Young suggested. "Or maybe they're working with someone who thinks differently." Before Neri could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The holographic display lit up with dozens of new red dots appearing from multiple directions. "Multiple Shadowkin fleets detected," an officer announced. "They're attacking the Centauri sector." Du-Young watched as the council commanders quickly organized their defense. Ships moved into their standard formations, taking up positions they had practiced countless times. But the Shadowkin weren't following their usual pattern. Instead of attacking head-on, their ships split into smaller groups. Some engaged the Council forces directly, while others slipped through gaps in the formation. "They're using chaos," Du-Young whispered, "just like we would." Neri looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "This isn't their normal strategy. They're being unpredictable, adaptive. Someone has taught them to think like humans." The battle wasn't going well for the Council forces. Their rigid formations, designed to counter traditional Shadowkin tactics, couldn't adapt quickly enough to the new approach. Ships were being destroyed as commanders waited for orders instead of reacting to the changing situation. Du-Young couldn't stand watching anymore. He stepped forward. "Commander, request permission to suggest an alternative strategy." The alien commander looked uncertain, but nodded. Neri had warned them to listen to human tactical suggestions. "Break up your formations," Du-Young said. "Let your ship captains make their own decisions based on the situation in front of them. Fight chaos with chaos." "That would be highly irregular," the commander protested. "Our crews are not trained for such." "Your crews are dying," Du-Young interrupted, pointing at the display. "Sometimes survival requires breaking the rules." After a moment of hesitation, the commander gave the order. The council ships broke their tight formations, spreading out into smaller, more flexible groups. At first, it seemed like total disorder, but slowly the tide of battle began to turn. Without rigid formations to target, the Shadowkin ships had trouble coordinating their attacks. Individual council captains, freed from strict protocols, began finding creative solutions to protect their ships and strike back. 2 hours later, the Shadowkin fleet retreated. The council had won, but at a heavy cost. Dozens of ships had been destroyed, and hundreds of crew members had been lost. In the command center, Neri approached Du Young. "How did you know?" "I didn't know," he admitted. "I just recognized the pattern because it's something we might have done." The Shadowkin learned that predictability is a weakness. The next day, Du Young was called to an emergency council meeting. Representatives from all 32 member species were present, either in person or via hologram. Neri stood beside him as he explained what he had observed. "The Shadowkin have somehow learned to use chaos as a weapon," he said. "They've broken free from their traditional patterns, and that makes them much more dangerous." "How can we defend against chaos?" one council member asked. "You can't," Du Young replied. "Not by using rigid, predictable methods. You need to learn to be adaptive, creative. You need to learn to think like humans." His words caused a stir in the chamber. Many council members looked uncomfortable with the suggestion. They had built their civilization on order and predictability. The idea of embracing chaos went against everything they believed in. But Neri stepped forward. "The human is right. We've already seen proof. Yesterday's battle was turned around only when we allowed our ships to break formation and adapt to the situation." Debates raged for hours. Some council members argued for maintaining their traditional methods. Others, led by Neri, pushed for change. Finally, a compromise was reached. A new joint training program would be established. Human military advisors would teach council forces how to think creatively and adapt to changing situations. In return, humans would learn about council technology and tactics. Du Young was chosen to lead the first training group. As he prepared for his new role, he couldn't help but wonder about the Shadowkin. Who had taught them to use chaos? And what would they do next? The answer came sooner than expected. A week into the training program, reports arrived of Shadowkin attacks on multiple fronts. They were using different tactics in each battle, making it impossible to predict their moves. "They're learning fast," Du Young told Neri as they reviewed the reports. "But they're only copying our methods. They don't truly understand chaos yet." "What do you mean?" Neri asked. "They're using chaos as a weapon, but they're not embracing it as a way of thinking. There's still a pattern to their unpredictability." Neri looked thoughtful. "Can you teach us to understand it the way humans do?" Du Young smiled. "We can try, but first, you need to understand something important. Chaos isn't just about being unpredictable. It's about being able to see patterns in disorder, to find opportunities in confusion." Over the next few weeks, Du Young worked with council military leaders, teaching them concepts that humans took for granted. He showed them how to think on their feet, how to trust their instincts, how to see opportunities in seemingly random events. It wasn't easy. Centuries of rigid thinking couldn't be undone quickly. But slowly, things began to change. Council ships started moving in less predictable patterns. Commanders began making decisions without waiting for detailed analysis. The fear of chaos began to fade. But the Shadowkin weren't waiting. Their attacks continued, growing bolder and more creative. The galaxy was changing, becoming more unpredictable, more dangerous. As Du Young watched another battle simulation, he realized that this was just the beginning. The gift of chaos that humanity had brought to the galaxy was spreading, for better or worse. The old order was breaking down, and no one could predict what would replace it. Neri came to stand beside him. "Do you ever regret sharing your methods with us?" Du Young shook his head. "Chaos was always there, waiting to be used. At least now you have a chance to understand it, to use it wisely." And the Shadowkin. They'll learn that copying human tactics isn't enough. True strength comes from understanding why those tactics work, from embracing uncertainty instead of just using it. As they watched the simulation end, Du Young thought about Earth, about how humans had learned to live with chaos, to find strength in uncertainty. Now it was time to teach that lesson to the galaxy. The storm was rising, and only those who could adapt would survive. Admiral Taiwan stood on the bridge of the Council flagship Eternal Order, watching the tactical display with growing concern. The Shadowkin had launched their largest offensive yet, pushing deep into Council space. Their fleets moved with an unpredictability that seemed almost human. "Status report," he ordered. As the first human to command a Council fleet, every decision he made was being watched carefully. Science Officer Mei Ray looked up from her station. 3 Council worlds have fallen in the past week. The Shadowkin are using different tactics for each attack. Our standard defenses are failing. Taiwan nodded slowly. The Council had appointed him to this position because they needed someone who understood chaos. But understanding it and stopping it were 2 different things. "Show me the pattern of their attacks," he said. The holographic display changed, showing a map of Council space. Red markers indicated fallen worlds, while blue showed worlds still under Council control. At first glance, the Shadowkin attacks seemed random. But Taiwan saw something else. "They're not just using chaos," he said. "They're using our own tactics against us. Look at how they're targeting supply lines instead of military bases." Mei studied the display. She had been working with Taiwan for months, learning to see patterns in chaos. "They're trying to isolate our strongest positions." "Exactly," Taiwan said. "They learned from watching us. But they're still thinking like soldiers, not like humans." The ship's communication system activated. A hologram of Council member Neri appeared. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the Proxima Defense Fleet. The Shadowkin are moving faster than we expected." Taiwan looked at the tactical display again. The Shadowkin were advancing on 3 fronts, each fleet using different tactics. The Council forces were struggling to adapt, still too bound by their training to embrace true chaos. "Council member Neri," he said, "I need complete authority over all fleets in this sector." Neri hesitated. No human had ever been given such control over Council forces. The other Council members will object. "Then they can watch more worlds fall," Taiwan replied firmly. "We can't fight this war with half measures." After a long moment, Neri nodded. "You have your authority, Admiral. Save our people." Taiwan turned to Mirai. "Send orders to all ships. We're going to show the Shadowkin what real chaos looks like." Over the next few hours, Taiwan reorganized the Council fleet. Instead of the traditional large battle groups, he split them into smaller, more flexible units. Each group was given basic objectives, but allowed to choose their own methods. "This goes against all Council military doctrine," one alien captain protested during the briefing. "Council doctrine is why we're losing," Taiwan responded. "The Shadowkin learned to use chaos as a weapon. We're going to show them that humans invented it." The new strategy was put to the test when Shadowkin forces attacked the Centauri sector. Instead of forming a defensive line, the Council ships scattered in seemingly random directions. Some ships appeared to flee, while others made suicidal charges. The Shadowkin commanders, expecting another organized defense, were caught off guard. Their formations broke apart as they tried to chase multiple targets at once. That's when Taiwan sprung his trap. The fleeing ships suddenly turned and attacked from behind. The charging ships pulled back, drawing Shadowkin forces into carefully prepared ambushes. What had looked like panic and disorder was actually a carefully orchestrated dance of controlled chaos. "Status report," Taiwan ordered as the battle reached its peak. "Shadowkin forces are in disarray," Mei reported. "They're trying to reform their battle lines, but our ships aren't giving them time to organize." Taiwan watched as his plan unfolded. The Council ships moved like a swarm of angry insects, striking from multiple directions, never staying still long enough to become targets. It was beautiful chaos, the kind that only humans seemed to truly understand. The Shadowkin fleet began to retreat, but Ta-1 wasn't finished. Signal all ships. Execute Pattern Omega. Pattern Omega wasn't really a pattern at all. It was permission for each ship captain to pursue and engage targets at their own discretion. The Council ships broke formation completely, becoming truly unpredictable. The retreat turned into a rout. Shadowkin ships were destroyed or captured as they tried to escape. Those that did get away would carry tales of a new kind of warfare, one that made their own attempts at chaos seem amateurish. In the aftermath of the battle, Mirai approached Ta-1 on the observation deck. The other captains want to know if we'll be using these tactics again. Ta-1 smiled. These weren't tactics, Mirai. This was philosophy. Humans don't just use chaos. We understand it. We see patterns in randomness and create order from disorder. That's something the Shadowkin haven't learned yet. News of the victory spread quickly through Council space. Some celebrated the new approach, while others worried about what it meant for their orderly society. But none could deny the results. Council member Neri called a meeting of the full council to discuss the implications. Ta-1 stood before the assembled representatives, explaining what had happened. The Shadowkin thought they could defeat us by copying our chaos, he said. But they only copied the surface, the visible patterns. They didn't understand the deeper truth. And what truth is that? One council member asked. That true chaos isn't about being unpredictable. It's about being adaptable. It's about seeing opportunities in disorder and having the courage to seize them. The council chambers erupted in debate. Some members argued for fully embracing human military doctrine. Others warned about the dangers of abandoning their traditional ways. Mirai, watching from the side, saw something that others missed. The very fact that the council was having this heated, disorganized debate proved that change had already begun. Their rigid society was learning to bend rather than break. Over the next few weeks, Ta-1 worked with Mirai to develop new combat doctrines. They combined human creativity with council technology, creating something entirely new. We're not just teaching them to fight, Mirai said one evening as they reviewed training simulations. We're teaching them to think differently. Ta-1 nodded. That's why the Shadowkin can't win. They're trying to use chaos as a weapon, but we're showing the council how to make it a way of life. The war was far from over. The Shadowkin still held several council worlds, and their forces were learning and adapting. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The council's perfect order had been disrupted, not by the Shadowkin's copied chaos, but by humanity's gift of true understanding. They were learning that strength came not from avoiding chaos, but from embracing it. As Ta-1 watched his mixed fleet of human and alien ships prepare for their next battle, he knew they had reached a turning point. The galaxy would never return to its old patterns, and that was exactly what it needed. The breaking point had come, but instead of shattering, the council was transforming. And somewhere out in space, the Shadowkin were about to learn the difference between using chaos and truly understanding it. Commander Sungmin watched from the bridge of his ship as the combined human council fleet moved through space. 3 years had passed since Admiral Ta-1's revolutionary battle tactics had changed the face of galactic warfare. Now they were preparing for what might be the final confrontation with the Shadowkin. All ships report ready, said his second-in-command, a council officer named Rin. Her silvery skin had taken on a slight blue tint, showing her excitement. Like many younger council members, she had fully embraced the new ways of thinking that humans had brought to the galaxy. Begin the operation, Sungmin ordered. Let each ship commander choose their own approach. Remember, coordination without control. The fleet split apart, each ship moving in its own unique pattern, while maintaining awareness of the whole. It was a beautiful sight, one that would have been impossible just a few years ago. The council ships now moved with the same creative freedom as human vessels. Dr. Hai Jin, the fleet's chief researcher, stood at her station monitoring the tactical display. She had spent the last 3 years studying how the integration of human chaos theory had changed Council military operations. "The Shadowkin fleet is responding exactly as predicted," she reported. "They're still trying to copy our old patterns." Sung Min nodded. The Shadowkin had learned to use chaos as a weapon, but they had never understood its true nature. They kept trying to create formulaic versions of human unpredictability, missing the point entirely. The battle began without warning. Council ships struck from multiple directions, each using different tactics. Some charged straight in, others hung back to provide support. A few ships seemed to move randomly, but their chaos had purpose. "They're confused," Rin reported, watching the Shadowkin response. "Their formations are breaking down." "Of course they are," Sung Min said. "They're looking for patterns that don't exist. Show them why humans named our ships after trickster gods." His own vessel, named Loki's Jest, spun through space in a dance of controlled chaos. Around him, ships named Coyote's Laugh and Anansi's Web wove complex patterns that defied prediction. The Shadowkin tried to adapt, but their responses were always a step behind, always reacting rather than creating. Their copied chaos was no match for the real thing. As the battle reached its peak, Dr. Hai-Jin made an interesting observation. "Commander, look at this analysis. The Shadowkin ships near the edges of their formation are starting to move differently." Sung Min studied the data. The outer Shadowkin ships were breaking from their programmed chaos patterns, truly improvising for the first time. "They're finally learning," he said. But it's too late. The battle ended decisively. Most of the Shadowkin fleet was captured or destroyed. Those ships that had shown true adaptation were allowed to retreat, carrying an important lesson back to their leaders. In the aftermath, Sung Min received a call from Council member Neri. Her hologram appeared on the bridge, looking pleased but thoughtful. "Excellent work, Commander," she said. "The Council has received a message from the Shadowkin leadership. They want to discuss peace terms." "Peace?" Rin asked, surprised. "They never seek peace. They've realized they can't win," Dr. Hai-Jin explained. "Not because we're stronger, but because they're fighting against something they don't understand." The peace conference was held on a neutral space station. Sung Min attended as part of the Council delegation, along with Dr. Hai-Jin and several other human officers. The Shadowkin representatives were not what anyone expected. "We have been foolish," the Shadowkin leader said through a translator. "We thought we could defeat you by copying your methods. But now we see that true strength lies not in copying chaos, but in understanding it." Dr. Hai-Jin stepped forward. "Your people have shown the capacity to learn. In the final battle, some of your ships began to show real adaptation." The Shadowkin leader nodded. "Those ships were commanded by our youngest officers, ones not fully trained in our rigid ways. They showed us that we must change." The peace treaty that emerged was unlike anything in Council history. Instead of strict rules and regulations, it established frameworks for cooperation and cultural exchange. The Shadowkin would learn from humans and the Council, while sharing their own knowledge in return. "It's more than just a military victory," Dr. Hai-Jin told Sung Min as they watched the treaty signing. "We've triggered an evolution in how civilizations think." She was right. Over the next few months, changes rippled through Council space. The rigid hierarchies began to relax. Innovation and creativity were encouraged rather than feared. Even the Shadowkin began to change, their society slowly embracing new ways of thinking. 6 months after the peace treaty, Sung Min attended a ceremony on Earth. The Council was establishing its first academy of creative warfare, where species from across the galaxy would learn to understand and use chaos effectively. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when humans first contacted the Council?" Neri asked him during the ceremony. "Honestly, no," Sung Min replied. "We thought we were the chaos in the galaxy's order. Instead, we became the teachers of a new kind of order, one that embraces chaos rather than fears it." Dr. Hai-Jin, who had been appointed as the Academy's first director, gave a speech that day that summed up everything they had learned. "The gift of chaos isn't about destruction or disorder," she said. "It's about adaptation, creativity, and growth. Humans didn't bring chaos to the galaxy. It was always there. What we brought was the understanding that chaos isn't something to be controlled or copied. It's something to be understood and embraced." As some men looked out over the audience, humans, council members, and even a few shadowkin all sitting together, he saw the truth of her words. The galaxy had changed forever, not through force of arms, but through the sharing of ideas. Later that evening, he stood with Rin and Dr. Hai-Jin, watching Earth's sunset. "What happens now?" Rin asked. "Now comes the interesting part," Dr. Hai-Jin replied. "We've taught the galaxy about chaos. Let's see what they create with that knowledge." Some men smiled. The gift of chaos had reshaped galactic warfare, but its true impact went far beyond military power. It had shown that strength comes not from imposing order or copying chaos, but from understanding both and finding balance between them. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, some men thought about all the possibilities that lay ahead. The galaxy was entering a new age, one where creativity and adaptation were valued alongside order and stability. The gift of chaos had done more than reshape warfare. It had reshaped the future itself, creating a galaxy where every species could learn, grow, and evolve in their own unique way. And that, some men realized, was the greatest victory of all.